Welcome to this deep dive. We're looking into something really interesting today, maybe something you haven't heard much about, the fear of headaches. It actually has a scientific name, cephalalgiaphobia.
That's right. And if you break down the name, it kind of tells you what it is. Cephalic is Latin, basically meaning head.
Okay.
And algia, well, that just means pain. So put it together. Cephalalgiaphobia, fear of head pain.
Right, fear of head pain. But hang on, who actually likes getting a headache? It sounds pretty normal to not want one. So what makes this a phobia specifically?
Yeah, that's the key distinction, isn't it? Harvey Featherstone talked about this back in the mid-'80s. It's not just disliking headaches.
Mm-hmm.
It's this intense fear of getting a headache or maybe a migraine, even when you're completely fine, like during pain-free times.
Ah, okay. So it's the anticipation. The fear hangs around even when the pain doesn't.
Exactly. It's that anxiety, that sort of constant worry that it's going to come back.
That makes more sense. And our sources mentioned something about a link to frequent migraines. Is that a big factor?
It seems to be, yeah. People who get migraines, often, especially severe ones, they seem more likely to develop this phobia.
Okay.
You could almost think of it as like a learned response. If you repeatedly have this really intense, unpredictable pain,
Right.
it can understandably lead to a state of, high alert, heightened anxiety about it happening again. That unpredictability is tough psychologically.
Yeah, I can see that. And this is where it gets quite counterintuitive because the fear leads to some surprising behaviors around medication, right?
Exactly. This is really interesting. To try and stop a headache before it starts, people with cephalalgiaphobia often end up taking pain medicine, like analgesics, preemptively.
Even when they feel okay.
Yeah, even when they feel totally fine, it becomes this sort of safety behavior, driven purely by that fear.
Which seems, well, it seems a bit backwards, doesn't it? You'd assume if someone's scared of pain, maybe more pain meds would be the focus. But sources say doctors often prescribe psychiatric meds instead. Why is that?
Well, because fundamentally, cephalalgiaphobia is understood as an anxiety disorder. It falls under the category of a specific phobia, specifically a phobia of illness.
Okay, so it's treated like other phobias.
Pretty much. So treatments that work for anxiety and other phobias are often the first line. Things like SSRIs, maybe tricyclic antidepressants, sometimes benzodiazepines for short periods, and crucially, psychotherapy. Talking therapies are really important to help people understand and manage the actual fear itself.
That's fascinating. So you're treating the underlying anxiety, not just trying to block potential pain signals, but it's not only about pills, is it? I think we saw mentions of non-drug approaches, too.
Yes, absolutely. Acupuncture, for instance, has shown some really positive results.
Acupuncture, how does that fit in?
Well, studies suggest that by actually helping to relieve the headache symptoms themselves,
Right.
acupuncture can then indirectly help reduce the fear about the headaches. It lessens the negative experience, which in turn can lessen the anticipatory anxiety. There was one study specifically on acupuncture use before people even got to a neurologist.
Interesting. So a physical therapy having a psychological benefit because it tackles the symptom effectively. Okay, now, how common is this? It sounds like we don't really have solid numbers on prevalence.
That's true. It's a bit tricky. The overall prevalence in the general population isn't well known. There just haven't been that many large-scale studies or reported cases.
And maybe people don't realize.
That's part of it, too. Like the sources mention, someone might just think they're being cautious by taking medication regularly, not realizing it's actually stemming from a phobic response.
Right. They wouldn't necessarily label it a phobia themselves, but there was that 2007 study you mentioned. It looked at a specific group.
Yes, exactly. That study, Cephalalgiaphobia, a possible specific phobia of illness, focused specifically on people with chronic migraines.
And what did they find there?
Within that group, they found a prevalence rate of around 60% who met the diagnostic criteria for a specific phobia, according to the DSM-IV.
60%. Wow.
Yeah, 60%. That's a really high number. It just highlights how debilitating this fear can be for people who are already dealing with frequent severe head pain.
That really puts it into perspective. 60%
Okay.
is huge. It shows just how much the fear of pain, not just the pain itself, can impact someone's life.
Definitely.
So just to recap the approaches then, we're looking at medications, often antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds.
Correct. SSRIs, tricyclics, sometimes benzodiazepines, typical for phobias and anxiety.
And also psychotherapy. Different kinds, presumably, to help manage the fear.
Yes, various types of therapy can help people develop coping strategies and challenge those fearful thoughts. Cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, things like that.
Okay. And then there's acupuncture, which seems to work on both the symptom and potentially the fear indirectly.
hmm That study we talked about suggests that by managing the headaches better, acupuncture can help break that cycle of pain and fear.
Now, here's another twist the sources brought up. Medication overuse headache. This sounds important.
Oh, absolutely critical. This is a really paradoxical situation.
Okay.
Medication overuse headache is basically a headache condition that develops because someone is taking pain medication too often.
Wait, taking medicine to prevent headaches makes them worse.
Ironically, yes. If you take certain pain relievers too frequently, often driven by that preemptive fear we discussed with cephalalgiaphobia, your body can sort of adapt, and it can actually trigger more frequent or sometimes more severe headaches.
Wow, so the very thing you're doing to avoid the problem actually ends up causing the problem, or at least making it worse.
Precisely. It's a real negative feedback loop. The attempt to control the pain through frequent medication backfires.
That is a really crucial point, especially for anyone listening who might be, popping pills preventatively out of fear. It really shows the complexity here.
It does.
So as we wrap up this dive into cephalalgiaphobia, it kind of leaves you, the listener, with a bigger question, doesn't it?
It really does. It makes you think about that complicated dance between fear, pain, and how we try to manage it all.
Yeah, and maybe question whether sometimes our efforts to control things out of fear can lead to totally unexpected, even counterproductive results for our health. Something to definitely ponder.